After a tough breakup, Jane moved to a new town, hoping for a fresh start. She rented an apartment close to her new workplace, hoping the change would help her heal. That morning, she arrived at her new place, exhaustion and heartache weighing heavy on her. Lost in her thoughts, she sighed and began unpacking, letting the quiet fill the empty space around her. The doorbell rang. Jane glanced through the peephole. It was the landlady, a sweet old woman holding a wicker basket. Forcing a smile, Jane opened the door. The landlady greeted her warmly and handed over a basket filled with freshly baked goods as a welcome gift. Touched by the kindness, Jane thanked her, feeling a flicker of hope that maybe this fresh start wasn't so bad after all. Once the landlady left, Jane returned to unpacking, trying to distract herself from the lingering sadness. Then, a knock on the door. Jane exhaled sharply, already feeling drained. Though her encounter with the landlady had been pleasant, she wasn't in the mood for more small talk. Peering through the peephole, she saw a little girl, no older than 8, standing in the corridor. She wore a sky blue frock, her neatly combed hair tied into pigtails. In her arms, she clutched a stuffed toy. Jane hesitated, rolling her eyes. Should she even bother opening the door? With a sigh, she unlatched it and opened the door. But the girl was gone. The corridor was empty. Jane let a frustrated groan and muttered, "Fucking kids," and then proceeded to close the door. The next morning, as Jane sat down for breakfast, she heard a soft knock at the door. Setting her coffee down, she walked over and peeked through the peephole. The little girl was back. This time, Jane didn't open the door. Instead, she just watched. The girl stood there for a moment, then smiled sweetly and gave a small wave. Then, she turned and walked down the corridor. She opened the door of the apartment and went inside. "Okay." The neighbor's kid, Jane sighed, already feeling her patience wearing thin. She had never been good with children. Her frustration simmered. The last thing she needed was a nosy kid disturbing her already chaotic life, and she could tell this one wasn't going to stop anytime soon. But she was new here, starting fresh. The last thing she wanted was to make a bad impression on her neighbors. So, with a deep breath, she let it go. For now. The next afternoon, Jane was taking a nap when a knock jolted her awake. Groggy and irritated, she sat up, already knowing who it was. That kid again. Annoyance flared in her chest as she stormed to the door, yanking it open without even checking the peephole. The corridor was empty. Jane's frustration spiked. Clenching her jaw, she stepped outside and marched straight to the kid's apartment. She rang the doorbell. A long moment passed before the door creaked open, still latched. A middle-aged man peered through the gap, his expression unreadable. His voice was low, almost irritated. "What?" Jane forced a polite smile. "Hi, I'm new here." She gestured toward her apartment. "I just moved in next door and your daughter." Before she could finish, the man's face darkened. "I don't have a daughter." And with that, he slammed the door in her face. Jane stood there, flabbergasted. What a rude man. A man without bedside manners, she thought. A few days passed without any encounters with her neighbors. To her relief, the kid seemed to have stopped the nuisance. She figured the father must have told his daughter to stop bothering her. Later that day, Jane ran into the landlady. With a warm smile, the older woman asked, "How are you settling in? Have you had a chance to meet your neighbors?" Jane nodded. "I've been busy, but I did have a quick encounter with the man next door, and his daughter." The landlady's smile faltered. A flicker of concern crossed her face. "That man doesn't have a daughter," she said. "In fact, There aren't little girls living in this building. Jane frowned. That can't be right. I saw the girl. She knocked on my door and I watched her walk into his apartment. The landlady shook her head firmly. I've known him for 4 or 5 years. He lives alone. A chill ran down Jane's spine. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her apartment. Her mind racing, she reasoned with herself. It had to be a visiting child, maybe a relative of the man next door. Shaking her head, as if physically dismissing the thoughts, she grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. Minutes passed. Then, a knock. Jane froze. A chill crept up her spine as she hesitantly approached the door, her heart pounding. Swallowing hard, she peered through the peephole. Her breath caught in her throat. The girl was standing there, covered in blood, sobbing hysterically. Jane's body went cold. Without thinking, she yanked the door open. "Oh, sweetie, what happened?" She gasped, but the girl didn't answer. She turned and bolted into the apartment next door, slamming the door shut behind her. Jane didn't stop to think. She just reacted. "Hey, kid. Wait," she called, rushing after the girl. She reached the apartment and banged on the door, her heart racing. "Kid, open the door." No answer. She grabbed the knob. It turned easily. The door creaked open. Hesitating for only a second, she stepped inside. The apartment was empty. Completely still. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she glanced around. "Hello?" she called, her voice unsteady. No answer. Jane's breath hitched, but she pressed on, stepping deeper into the apartment. It was a simple 2-bedroom layout. She checked the living room. Empty. The kitchen. Nothing. Her unease grew as she pushed open the bedroom door. Everything appeared normal, except for the bedside shelf. A neat row of stuffed toys sat there, perfectly arranged. Her stomach dropped. Among them was the very toy the little girl always clutched. Her hands trembled. If she wasn't his daughter, why was her toy here? Swallowing hard, Jane took a cautious step forward. Beneath the shelf, a work desk sat pushed against the wall. Something compelled her to check. She opened the drawers, one by one, rifling through their contents. Then she found it. A large, worn scrapbook. Jane hesitated, then flipped it open. The pages were filled with Polaroids, each one capturing a different little girl, all smiling. But it wasn't just photos. Each page was like a twisted shrine, a lock of hair taped beside the image, a ribbon, a hair tie, and each of them lying in the pool of blood. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages, page after page, smiling little girls. Her hands trembled as she frantically flipped through the pages, her breath caught in her throat. Then she reached the last one. Her heart stopped. The photo looked familiar. It was the little girl who had been knocking on her door for the past few days. The same sweet smile, the same pigtails, the same stuffed toy clutched in her arms. The final Polaroid showed her lifeless body in a pool of blood. Jane's hands flew to slam the book shut. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She shoved the scrapbook back into the drawer, turned on her heel, and bolted out of the apartment. Slamming the door behind her, she sprinted down the corridor, breath ragged until she reached her own apartment. She rushed inside, locked the door, and bolted it shut. Chest heaving, she pressed her back against the door. Then, snapping out of it, she darted across the room, frantically searching for her phone. Then, she calls the cops. The corridor buzzed with law enforcement officers moving swiftly, voices overlapping. Jane stood amidst the chaos, watching as the man was led away in handcuffs, his face expressionless. Inside his apartment, officers combed through every inch, collecting evidence, proof of the horrors he had committed. Jane listened in disbelief as she learned the truth. He had been kidnapping little girls, taking them to a remote cabin, doing unspeakable things. He was a serial predator. And the girl who had knocked on Jane's door? She had gone missing just weeks ago. Jane sat with an officer, recounting everything she had seen, her hands still trembling as she gave her statement. Then, as she lifted her head, her breath caught. At the far end of the corridor stood the girl, clutching her stuffed toy, a gentle smile on her face. Tears welled in Jane's eyes. She smiled back. The girl waves at Jane and then she walks away.